No.
Everybody ready? Okay, we get to call this meeting to order, October 6th, 2019, 6 p.m. Roll call.
Robert Gibson,
Present.
Valerie Edwin,
Present?
Robert Rodriguez,
Present.
Eduardo Navarro,
Present.
Robert Eggers,
Present.
all commissioners present.
All right. Pledge allegiance, Eduardo.
Ready to salute? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Board announcement. Anybody have any announcements? Commissioners?
Robert?
Valerie?
It's just, yeah, last night, I went to Morgan Hill to the Planning Commission, and I've been following this development. It's a commercial development in Morgan Hill where they're developing like 70, huge amount of space for a tech park. But in the hearing last night, it became apparent with the developer that they were developing more of a distribution center, like an Amazon type thing, because of the number of truck parking spaces. And so there was an outrage, since this is in a residential area, basically, low density, but still residential. So it was very, very eye-opening to see their process in comparing how we do it and how what the issues are with the population, jobs, and development in our neighbors' area, because it's trickle down. So anyway, I wanted to let you know.
Thank you.
Nothing for me.
Any department announcements?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darrell Boyd, RMA. I guess the only announcement I'd make is that we think Tavin Kennison Brown will return from medical leave tomorrow. We think we're optimistic that he will be back soon. Thanks.
Okay, we open up for public comment. Anybody who speak on something that's not on the agenda can come forward. Okay, public comment closed. Consent agenda. Anybody have any?
Oh, yeah, I didn't find any significant anomaly in the minutes.
Okay, so
I concur.
we make a, nope,
No, I agree.
we have a motion to approve all of it.
I move to accept the minutes as presented.
Okay, all in favor?
I second that.
Now, all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Acknowledgement of the public hearing. Certificate of posting, everything's fine? Yes? I think we jumped all that, yeah. We jumped to the adoption of the minutes.
Michael posted, I believe.
Okay. Okay, regular agenda. So we have the airport people here.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Veronica Lezama with the San Benito County Airport Land Use Commission, as well as with the Council of San Benito County Governments. And first and foremost, we wanted to extend our appreciation to the Planning Commission for allowing us the opportunity to present the draft Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan for your consideration this evening. We also wanted to extend an invitation to, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please do not hesitate to let us know. Otherwise, we'd be happy to take your questions after the presentation. So as part of the presentation, I will be providing the commission with some background information about Fraser Lake Air Park. I will then go over the roles, the responsibilities, and the limitations of the San Benito County Airport Land Use Commission, followed by the purpose of the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that was drafted for the Fraser Lake Air Park. I will then introduce Mr. Walter Windus, the consultant hired to assist us in preparing the compatibility plan. Walter will then address the factors that prompted the update to the plan. We will then dive into the draft compatibility policies and maps, which essentially establish the framework for the compatibility plan. I will then go over the public outreach process and project schedule, and then lastly answer any additional questions that you may have. So we'll start with some basic information about Fraser Lake Air Park. It is located northwest of the Hollister Municipal Airport. The lands surrounding the air park are located within the jurisdiction of the County of San Benito. The air park is also privately owned for public use. It consists of a board of directors and an airport manager. The air park is primarily used for recreational purposes, and it consists of two runways. The first is the only FAA-approved water surface runway in the western United States. The second runway is the only public irrigated turf runway in the state of California. So the role of the San Benito County Airport Land Use Commission is essentially to protect public health, safety, and the welfare of not only the pilots but also the inhabitants of the lands that surround the two local airports. Now that protection is accomplished through the adoption and of an airport land use compatibility plan that we've prepared for Fraser Lake Air Park. So over the last several months, we have been working on that document, which is being presented for your input this evening. And before we go into the specifics about the compatibility plan, I did want to go over briefly the limitations of the Airport Land Use Commission. So when considering proposed development, the Airport Land Use Commission may only find a project as either consistent or inconsistent with the compatibility plan. Our commission cannot approve or disapprove projects that authority lies with the County of San Benito. The commission also has no authority over the operations of the airport as well as existing land uses, even if those land uses are inconsistent with the compatibility plan. So compatibility plans are essential for promoting just that, compatibility between the airports and the lands that surround them. Specifically, they identify land use measures and policies that minimize the public's exposure to excessive noise and safety hazards. These types of plans are required for all public use airport, regardless if they are publicly owned or privately owned. They are also used by planners when conducting reviews of development that is proposed around the airports. This particular land, we refer to it as the airport influence area, and we'll be going over the geographic coverage of that area a little later in the presentation. Compatibility plans must also be compatible with the state's airport land use planning handbook, and they have to include basically 4 factors. Those include noise, safety, airspace protection, and overflight. And let's see, so at this time, we wanted to go ahead and introduce Mr. Walter Windus, again, the consultant hired to prepare the compatibility plan, who would be going over those factors. Mr. Windus has extensive aviation experience, particularly he prepared several of the compatibility plans, including those for Mineta San Jose International Airport, Moffett Federal Airfield in Sunnyvale, and he also prepared the existing comprehensive land use plan for San Benito County back in 2001. He's past chairperson of the Santa Clara Airport Land Use Commission. He's a retired professional engineer, current flight instructor, and aircraft mechanic. He's also past manager of a couple of airports and retired as vice president of a high-tech company. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Mr. Walter Windus, who will be going over those 4 compatibility factors, but I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time that you may have. No questions? Okay, so we'll go ahead and turn it over to Walter. Sure.
If the,
Right here.
oh, okay, very good. Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present the plan to you. First thing I'd like to mention is that This is an update to the existing plan, so it's not a new plan beyond the plan that was adopted in 2001. The reason that the plan was found desirable to be updated was the current airport land use planning handbook has substantially different safety zone dimensions over the safety zones in the 1993 land use planning handbook. And because they're substantially different, it was felt necessary and desirable to include those in the current land use plan for Fraser Lake Airport. Another reason that it was desirable to update the plan is the original definition of the airport influence area was based on an imaginary oval centered on the airport. And it was difficult for the planners to determine whether or not the project was inside that oval or outside the oval. And therefore, in some cases, the policies from the 2001 land use plan were not being applied where they should have been applied. So we took a different approach this time and identified the airport influence area by geographic boundaries. And specifically, we used Lover's Lane, Shore Road, out to the railroad tracks up to the Powell River, up the Powell River a little bit, then it goes up Miller Canal to the county boundary and back around to Lover's Lane. So the county planners then only have to determine, is it on one side of that boundary or the other side of that boundary, to identify whether or not it's in the airport influence area and subject to the to the land use plan. We feel that this will make their life a lot easier. One improvement that we have this time around is GIS available in the county, and we are working with the GIS people to see if we can incorporate some of those GIS features and get them associated with a parcel. So if a request comes in for development on a specific parcel, the planners would be able to pull that information up on the GIS system and determine whether or not it's in the airport influence area and whether or not it's in a safety zone and so forth. So the 4 compatibility policy areas deal with noise, safety, airspace, and overflight. What you have next is a slide showing the aircraft noise contours. And I want to point out that no changes were made in this area. So the aircraft noise contours identified in the 2001 plan are being carried over into this plan. The reason for that is that when we evaluated the future operations, the existing and future operations on the airport, which of course established the noise footprint around the airport, we determined that because of the recession and the decline in aviation, there really was no change in the forecast. So because the forecast remained the same, the noise contours remained the same. So no change in that area. You can see there were a couple of changes, relatively minor changes, in the compatibility policies associated with noise. Highlighted in red there are what the changes are. They're primarily just word changes, nothing significant. The safety zones then are the major cause for the updating of the land use plan. This slide shows what the safety zones looked like based on the Airport Land Use Planning Handbook in 1991. And you can see basically they extend out from the end of the runway, and they extend out basically 4,500 feet from the end of the runway. The revised safety plans, on the other hand, pull those safety zones back in towards the airport, but also add the turning zones, turning safety zones, TSC. I'm presuming that you have a handout with these maps, is that?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, okay.
But it's a little,
Yes,
you know,
okay. So the consequence was that because of the addition of the turning safety zones, the approximately 100 acres of land outside the airport boundary was included in the safety zone environment. The safety zones are established based on an analysis of where aircraft accidents occur. And it turns out, not surprisingly, I guess, that most aircraft accidents occur in the vicinity of an airport. And it further turns out that the closer you get to the runway ends, the greater the probability of an aircraft accident. So the land use plan and the philosophy of 216, the statute establishing the Airport Land Use Commission and requiring an airport land use plan, the philosophy is to minimize the potential impact on the people on the ground from an aircraft accident. So the way that has been established to minimize the impact of people on the ground is to minimize the number of people on the ground in the high-risk areas. So that's the philosophy of these safety zones. The runway protection zone is right at the end of the runway. In the case of Fraser Lake Airport, the southwest runway protection zone is totally on airport property, and the northeast runway protection zone has about a third of the runway protection zone across Lake Road onto the adjacent property. As you go out from the end of the runway, the restrictions become fewer and fewer. And that'll show up in the policy table 4-2. And this is table 4-2, the next slide. You can see that there's quite a bit of change between the old and the new, or the existing and the proposed. This is dictated by the Airport Land Use Planning Handbook. Recall that the statutes require that the Airport Land Use Plan development must be guided by the Airport Land Use Planning Handbook. That's a statutory requirement. The good news is, in the majority of the cases, the restrictions are the same as current zoning restrictions on the property surrounding the airport, and specifically residential development is not constrained beyond the county policies that currently exist. There's two exceptions to that I want to point out. One of them is the runway protection zone, where no residential development is allowed. Remember, I said the majority of that is on airport property. And the other area is the inner safety zone. And a lot of that is on airport property, but a lot of it is not on airport property, but off the ends of the runway. Now, it does not prohibit development in that area, but it does prohibit residential development in that area. The next area is the overflight protection, airspace protection, and it's referred to as FAR Part 77, Federal Aviation Regulations Part 77. In essence, that can be thought of as an inverted cone centered over the airport. So the further up you go in elevation, the further out from the airport, the height restriction is established. The majority of well, let's say the next slide shows the same diagram. There's no change in that diagram, by the way, and no additional restrictions in that area. But the diagram has been refined with greater accuracy. So no change in that area, no change in the close-up runway protection zone diagram, but it was drawn to a greater detail so that if some development was being planned in that area, they'd find it easier to determine whether or not it would be consistent. The airport influence area is the one that has the greatest change, and the next slide shows the airport influence area on the existing land use plan. And remember, I mentioned that it was an oval shape, and you can appreciate the difficulty the planners have in determining whether or not the project is inside or outside that oval circuit. GIS would help, but still there's a bit of doubt, and I can understand and appreciate that. The new airport influence area I mentioned earlier is bounded by geographic features, roads, railroads, the river, and the county boundary line. And I mentioned previously that it should be much simpler for the planners to determine whether or not a project is inside the airport influence area or outside. The definition of the airport influence area is the land area that's potentially impacted by aircraft operations. And this slide that I have is a composite of the safety zones, the noise contours, and the Part 77 surface, the airspace protection. You can see clearly that the proposed airport influence area totally encompasses the safety zones and the noise contours. It doesn't quite totally enclose the Part 77 surfaces. A trade-off was made in that regard, realizing that it's more important to have a geographic boundary and make life easy for the county planners. On the other hand, the areas of the Part 77 surface that fall outside the airport influence area have an elevation high enough that it's very unlikely development of that height would even be considered. And by that, I'm talking about 200 feet or greater. So the only thing that, only type of development that might possibly fall in that area is an antenna, for example. And antennas are covered under a different section, which applies to the county as a whole. And there's a specific reason for that. So this is the proposed airport influence area. It's believed that it benefits everybody and doesn't penalize anybody associated with the airport. If there's no questions right now, I'll answer questions later.
So as far as the public outreach is concerned, we began our efforts early on in the development of the plan. We put up a couple of project signs out by Fraser Lake Air Park, bilingual signs notifying hopefully the property owners in the vicinity that the plan was being prepared. We also mailed letters to all of the property owners that are located within the airport influence area, again notifying them that the project was coming forward. We prepared a project website, and there's a link there for your information. We also held one-on-one meetings with the property owners. We had about under 10 folks that contacted us after either seeing a sign or receiving a letter. And so we explained the potential impacts to their property as well as the project schedule. And we also presented a couple of months ago to the Fraser Lake Air Park Board of Directors over in Morgan Hill. So just to briefly go over the project schedule, in September, the San Benito Airport Land Use Commission released the draft compatibility plan and draft initial study. That same month, we released a press release, which was published in the local media. The commission our Airport Land Use Commission is scheduled to hold a public hearing at our regularly scheduled meeting tomorrow afternoon. You're more than welcome to attend if you have any additional feedback. And then next week, we're also presenting to the County Board of Supervisors. And then the public comment period will then conclude on November 4th. And we'll be asking the Airport Land Use Commission to consider adopting the draft compatibility plan and initial study at their December meeting. As far as implementation, so once the San Benito County Airport Land Use Commission adopts the compatibility plan and initial study, the County of San Benito, as the land use authority, has the responsibility to enforce the compatibility plan that is established in the Public Utilities Code. Also, specifically, the listed government code mandates that the county incorporate the compatibility plan provisions by either amending the general plan or adopting a specific plan, such as an airport overlay zone. And that has to be done within 180 days from the Airport Land Use Commission adopting the compatibility plan. And we will be working closely with county planning staff if any assistance is needed for that process. And in closing, I also wanted to thank Mr. Richard Felsing for being part of the project's development team meeting. He provided some important input throughout the document, so I wanted to recognize him for his time. And that concludes our presentation at this time. You know, we'd be happy to answer any additional questions that you may have. We recognize it's quite a technical document and not an easy read.
Go
Go ahead.
through the chair, I'm curious to see what, in conducting the community engagement and public outreach, what were some of the comments or feedback kind of obtained from the project?
Yeah, so since the public comment period officially began in September, September 20th, we haven't received a lot of public comment. Actually, I don't think we received any public comment, but we did, when we met with those property owners in the summer, some of the questions were, how is this going to impact my property? You know, if I want to add a secondary unit, is that going to be restricted? We said no. If it's allowed in the county general plan, it would be allowed under the compatibility plan, except for those safety zones that Walter mentioned, which are already in the airport property anyway. So you wouldn't have houses in the airport property per se. So some of the other questions, just project schedule, when will the final draft be available for public review? We directed them to the website, provided them with our contact information if they had any. And we prepared a press release, and it was published at Benito Link and San Benito Live. And we haven't received really any additional public comment. I think this document is very specific to the lands that surround the airport, so it could be that just anyone wouldn't necessarily have a comment on that. Unless you were directly affected or own property within that airport influence area that Walter mentioned.
Thank you.
Of course, you're welcome.
Through the chair, how many acres are affected by the expansion of the safety zones?
You know, we knew you were going to ask that question, and we did not bring the answer. But Walter, I know the airport influence area, the existing and the proposed, it's actually gotten smaller. We can send out the exact acreage unless you have that, or you found that? Okay, of course you did.
Yeah, I didn't bring with me the change in the airport influence area. My recollection is that it's about 50 acres less. So essentially, it's the same. What I did bring with me, and I don't know that you specifically are asking this question, is the change in the safety zones. And I do have that in here someplace. I've got it.
You can see the map.
That's okay. Okay. And these calculations were taken off of airport property. So this is the change in safety zones outside the airport boundary. And in the case of the east end, the new safety zones total 109 acres. The old safety zones total 53 acres. The net increase is 56 acres, and that's primarily due to the addition of the turning safety zones. Not exclusively, but primarily. Part of it also occurred as a consequence of widening the outer safety zone. It was much narrower but longer. But the majority of it is adding the turning safety zones. In the case of the southwest end of the airport and the runway, the old dimension was 47 acres. The new number is 89 acres, or a net increase of 42 acres. And again, that's primarily a consequence of the turning safety zones being added, which didn't exist in the previous plan. Are there any other questions in that area I can answer?
I got one question. If someone wants to develop around the airport or the safety zones, and they find it inconsistent, but they can still build even though it's inconsistent, correct?
Well, yes, there's a couple of opportunities here. Let's take the worst case where somebody wants to put a residence in the inner safety zone, and that is not allowed in the land use plan. However, the applicant can bring it before the County Board of Supervisors, and by a supermajority, the Board of Supervisors can override that policy for that particular applicant. Now, I would caution the applicant from taking that approach, because the reason no residents are permitted in that area is because that's where aircraft accidents occur, and they would be subjecting themselves to the probability of an aircraft accident.
But the business can go in there, no, even if it's inconsistent. But the manual you're talking about, the Caltrans manual, is just a manual, it's not a concrete
That's correct.
for people not to build or not to, that's just a manual to give guidelines to
Yes.
counties and cities, correct?
No, well, the county and city can use it, but it's...
But it's not something concrete.
No, it's not concrete. The statutes require that the development of airport land use plans have to take that handbook into consideration. And the problem is, if you start deviating too much away from that document, you open yourself to the potential of a lawsuit that may not be defendable. Whereas if you follow the policies in the Airport Land Use Planning Handbook, if a lawsuit is filed, you are on much firmer grounds in defending against the lawsuit.
But now Fraser Lake cuts right in front of it, Lake Road's in that, in the manual, I believe you can't put no roads in those areas.
I'm sorry?
Fraser Lake's on there, you're not supposed to put roads in those areas on the TSP or the other
No,
safety zones.
You can put roads in there.
But it also in the manual says you're not supposed to. Am I correct, or is that
No,
changed?
you're not correct. There's no restriction in putting roads or highways or freeways in that area. And the reason is that the impact on the public is minuscule, because cars are presumably traveling through that area. and they have mobility, and if they see an airplane in trouble or an airplane about to come down, they're able to maneuver and avoid it, much greater than if you, for instance, had a retirement home or a children's playground or something like that, where the mobility is much more restricted. But the specific answer to your question is it does not restrict or impact development of roads in any way whatsoever.
Do you have how can we get a copy of the Caltrans manual?
Yeah, it's available on a website. And as a matter of fact, I've got it referenced in the document. I'm not sure that the document on the website has an operating link, but the plan was developed with an operating link in the biography that you could just click on that sentence and it would bring you right up to that document.
Yeah, because you're just talking about homes and hospitals and all that, but most people are going to, if they want to develop, they're going to put industrial businesses, not, you
Yeah,
know.
industrial.
And that area should be all industrial in the future.
Yeah. The general plan, the county general plan, has a policy of maintaining agricultural lands for agriculture. And while there can be agricultural support buildings, and that's probably what you're thinking about,
Well, that land's not really good for agriculture. Not all of it.
right?
Yeah, so I thought the general plan was going to do all that industrial.
Yeah, as I say, except for the runway protection zone, industrial development is not prohibited.
Okay. Commissioners, any more questions?
Now, I would add to
Go ahead.
the Chair's statement is that you have here on page 1-1, section 21675 requires the ALUC to formulate and maintain an airport land use compatibility, provide for the orderly growth of each public airport and the areas surrounding the airport within the jurisdiction of the commission, and will safeguard the general welfare of the inhabitants within the vicinity of the airport and the public in general. The commission airport land use compatibility plan shall include and shall be based on long-range master plan or an airport layout plan. And that's for the next 20 years. So it's asking that this be, and I believe that you're going to 38, right? 2038. This is.
Yes, the airport's been in existence
Right.
that long.
And so, considering the sphere of influence that you have around the airport right now, at this point, it's expected that it's not going to need to grow any further than that. I think I saw some statistics in here that indicate that that will suit easily through 2038.
Right.
Okay.
The paragraph that you're quoting is taken directly from the statute. The statute says that the land use plan should be developed for at least the next 20 years of the airport existence. Airports, as a rule, last much longer than 20 years, and Fraser Lake Airport falls in that category because it's owned by a corporation. The corporation is owned by the members, and the members change over time, but the corporation stays in existence. The corporate bylaws state that before the property can be sold, a vote of 75% of the members has to approve the sale. So there's a supermajority clause put in the bylaws to inhibit the sale of the airport and the change of the airport from aviation use. So I foresee the airport being in existence for a long time. And personally, I see sometime in the next 50 years, perhaps even the county taking a more serious interest in it and considering purchasing it and using it for aviation use and operated by the county.
Yep. It's a very interesting airport. You know, I loved that you included this picture of that, what is it? This
Water runways?
water plane.
Yes.
Because I was trying to imagine it as I went through the paperwork, and it described this. Well, you've got a grassy strip, and then you've got a water strip that's good for raising guppies or something. And I said, "Wow, I mean, this is really unusual." And to hear Veronica's description that it is the only one in the western states that has this waterway.
Yes,
That's fantastic. I mean, for San Benito County, we've got it.
right.
Yeah.
It turns out that there's 4 or 5 in the U.S. There's a couple up in Alaska, and the ones in the U.S. are down in Louisiana, where the water table is about 4 inches below the surface.
Yeah.
Fraser Lake, obviously, the water table is much lower. But the water runway, and I'll call it a lake, it is of sorts, is also used by the county to grow mosquito-eating fish. And they actually go out there a couple times a year and harvest them out of the water, and then offer them free throughout the county for people that have some
Vernal
ponds and
ponds.
stuff. So it's a multiple use facility.
Yeah, it's super.
Where is the waterway? I go through Fraser Lake all the time. I don't see it.
Let's-
The water. Where's the water runway?
Oh,
Is that picture?
It's right in the middle.
South side.
Yeah.
See, it's
it's
right
Oh, yeah. It's on that one.
The
but
blue-
on.
the blue arrow there, yes. The water runway is actually longer than the grass runway.
Okay. I've never seen a water runway.
Yeah.
There are planes that don't have wheels. They only
Yes.
have pontoons.
Pontoons, yes.
And they're quite common in Alaska. They're not very common here. But there are people that operate strange airplanes.
How long is that runway?
The grass runway is 2,500 feet, and the water runway is 3,000 feet.
3,000.
Yes.
What is it? A couple of feet of water?
Yes, it's 2.5 feet deep.
Okay. I just never see it. That's probably why. You can't see it from Fraser Lake.
It turns out you really don't need very much water to operate a seaplane, even the large seaplanes. And it also turns out that they need the greatest depth when they're idling or in the displacement mode, if you're familiar with marine terms, boating terms. Once they start getting up to speed, they skim along the surface and take a couple of inches.
Yes. Okay. I just never saw it.
Well, I can imagine that if you've got this type of airplane that's going into like the Sierras, into like a lake area, you've got a rescue situation going maybe, and to have something closer, you know, if they can make it to Hollister and they can get to the hospital and things like that.
Yes.
I mean, it's a good thing. Anyway.
Through the chair, could we get specific concerns or responses from the property owners within the blue, green, and red areas? I'm curious as to what their thoughts are about the restrictions.
Those properties have been given specific notice of the land use plan and and they could read the plan and read the potential impacts. Their property now is being used for agricultural purposes, primarily off the southwest end. It's dryland farming. Generally on the northeast end, it's some dryland farming, some horse grazing, corrals, that kind of thing. So there's no, and to the north of the airport, it's a designated floodplain as well. So the opportunity for development would be limited in that particular area.
But Veronica had said that there were 10 property owners that actually attended a meeting.
Right.
And I would be curious to what their specific responses or concerns were, if any.
Yeah, we, if I may, Walter. This was in the summer, so what I did is I requested their assessor parcel number before we met them. That way we can get a good sense of how the plan could potentially impact their property. There was one closer, and I'm trying to remember where exactly, because I mapped it and I showed it to them, and they didn't have any concerns. But what I can do is I can pull the APNs that I did receive questions for, and I'd be happy to send those to you, and some of the comments that we received, we documented that.
Okay.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
It would have been nice if we had them tonight.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can do
let's
that.
not quite 100% prepared.
It wasn't during the public comment period, but it was a part of the outreach process that we wanted to get in advance of the official public comment period. So we wanted to be proactive prior to the official public comment period opening. But we'd be happy to send that to you, not a problem at all.
So the ALUC heard those comments then?
The airport line, they were not specific comments on the document per se. They didn't say, well, this policy is going to affect my property this way. I think you should change it. It was mostly about learning about the plan, knowing about its potential impacts. They provided us information about their future plans for their property, and nothing in there raised any red flags for them. So if it didn't raise any red flags for them, I didn't feel that it was my role to express any issues if they didn't have them. But like I said, we're trying to be proactive because we recognize this has to, it impacts people's property rights, and that's why we took the extra steps of starting the public outreach process in advance of the actual official public outreach process.
Thank you.
Date. Yeah, of course.
But also a lot of people don't understand all this complexity of the airport.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what
Yes, that's why they-
I agree. Yeah, no, it is.
We should have documented all that and,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why we thought it was super important to schedule one-on-one meetings with them. We actually booked up a couple of dates, but only got interest for one day, so we scheduled an hour slots for each property owner so that we can give them an overview of the plan and definitely go into the specifics. So we found it important to meet with them on that one-on-one instead of just trying to call them over the phone, or so we offered that courtesy to them. Any other questions that we can ask or that you have?
Anybody?
Anybody?
I have just
Valerie?
one more, and that was something that occurred to me as I was reading this, is that in there it mentions development on surrounding properties, and it was duly noted that it's all ag. But considering there was some statistic about how many of the airplanes flying in and out and hangared there were from Santa Clara County, and that in the future it was probably expected that a lot of it, might be just private owners, commuting. And so it occurred to me that, well, is there going to be a snack shack, or is somebody going to have, the idea of developing maybe a little Airbnb so that if pilots come in, they have a place to stay late at night. Oftentimes airports do accommodate pilots, when they're just kind of off course or out of sync with their schedule. So I was thinking that.
Yeah, if that development comes forth, our office, we'd be happy to take a look at it. And if it's consistent, we definitely would recommend it for consistency. And if it's not, then it's pretty straightforward, and we would not recommend it for consistency determination. Again, for just ensuring the safety of the residents and the pilots as well.
But that would also be considered like a home, right? Because, you've got a permanent thing that can't get out of the way.
Yeah.
And so, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know how the county designates Airbnbs under their general plan, if it's residential or temporary house.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how.
Yeah.
It would depend on how the county would define that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, right now, there's no distinction made by the county in the land use regulations at this time. There's been conversations, I understand, perhaps about that, but there's nothing specifically called out for Airbnbs at this time.
In most cases, in many cases at least, people who operate those kinds of facilities also provide temporary transportation. So, and very often motels do that as well. So if a pilot has some business, let's say in Hollister, and for some reason wants to land at Fraser Lake instead of Hollister Airport, they can have their business associate come and meet them at the airport and drive them back into town. Or the motel, in many cases, will send a car out and pick them up and bring them back into the motel.
Yeah.
So they, having those facilities right at the airport is not necessary, and I can't think of too many cases where that a bed and breakfast occurs in the near-term vicinity of the airport. A few of the big airports, of course, have hotels on the airport. Concord is one in particular that is a medium-sized airport. It doesn't have commercial air carrier activity. The air carrier airports generally have hotels in the immediate vicinity of the airport or even on airport property, but not small airports like what we have.
Thank you.
That'll probably come around 50, 60 years from now.
Well, that's 38, is not that long ago,
Mhm.
or to come.
Any other questions from the commission? Thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to present to you this evening.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Any public comment? Open? No? So, we close it, so what do we do?
Through the chair, although the staff prepared a resolution for your consideration, that's probably overkill for what this matter is really an information item for the consideration of the commission. There is, of course, a proposed negative declaration under CEQA, and so if you felt for some reason that there was that it would be inappropriate for there to be a negative declaration because you're aware of some significant evidence of potentially significant environmental effect from adoption of the airport land use plan, then you could submit those comments, discuss that, decide on a sense of the commission to prepare a letter for those comments and authorize the chair to sign the letter. You wouldn't be required to adopt a formal resolution for that purpose. But there's one drafted for your use if, in your discretion, that's what you wanted to do. If you had no comments, there's no action necessary to be taken.
No action.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. No action necessary? Okay. There'll be no
Thank
action
you.
necessary, I guess.
So no comments, Mr. Chair?
No.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make it clear for the record. Thank you.
So if there's no comments necessary or we're not taking no action, it's done.
That's that.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Close the meeting?
There's one more item.
One more. Oh,
There's
Oh, the
the
discussion.
discussion item, Mr. Chair.
I
So-
thought you're gonna have a short evening.
One of the
Well, yeah,
commissioners causing
this
trouble.
is up to you guys. Thanks, Mr.
Sorry
Chair.
about that.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, just as by way of introduction, Commissioner Gibson specifically had brought to staff's attention a request for a presentation by the Broadband Consortium. So that's one question, I think, is if the commission's interested in having such a presentation, then staff will go forth and set it up for, one of the upcoming meetings. So that's one question. The other question for the commission is that there were, again, Commissioner Gibson brought it to staff's attention that there's the Monterey Bay Economic Development Partnership. I don't remember the acronym now, but
MBEP.
yeah. And so that's coming up soon. The state of the state of the local regional economy, and because the tickets were starting to run out, we went ahead and Harry Mavrogenis, RMA director, went ahead and found funds to purchase 2 tickets. So there's 2 tickets available. It's like an all-day event in Monterey, and so the 5 of you can, I don't know, arm wrestle or however you want to decide, rocks, paper, scissors, whatever, who's going to go to the conference. So that would be another possible question for the commission to discuss. So, and then back to the chair.
As an FYI, it's I've been to the MBEP conference before. I think either last year or the year before. Very informational, and specifically on a lot of the trickling effects that are affecting our community from Silicon Valley and even the Monterey Peninsula. So, full disclaimer, but it's very informative. Lots of information.
Through the chair, Commissioner Egland and I already purchased tickets, so the 2 tickets would be available to the other 3 commissioners or whomever else.
Or would there be any board of supervisors that would be interested? Do we reach out to them?
We can certainly follow up. Some of them may have already bought their own tickets, perhaps, but certainly if the commission can't use them, we'll.
I won't be able to attend next Friday. So
So it was next Friday, you said?
It's the 25th, right?
25th.
I think it's 25th. Yeah, next Friday.
Yeah.
Or the other option, Mr. Chair, another option would be the Commissioners Gibson and Eglin could use those 2 tickets and perhaps get a refund on the tickets they already purchased or something too. Might be another option, but that's up to you all.
I don't think there's refund.
Maybe there's not. There may not be.
Just has to tell me made a mistake.
Okay. Well, that's,
So, commissioners, nobody,
I'm unable to
Yeah.
attend that day. Yes.
I'm unable to
Friday.
attend,
Okay,
so,
okay. We'll figure out the
We'll
refund
figure it out.
situation and we'll go from there.
right.
or maybe some of the planners wanted to use them.
that's another option.
Yeah, we'll check with Director Mavrogenis and see.
Okay. So for item number 1, the broadband consortium, it limits our ability to attract big tech here because we don't have the structures in place to provide bandwidth. And they meet telephonically monthly. It's people from all over the area. John Freeman from San Juan is part of it. And there was a discussion at a meeting, public meeting, a few months ago, and then they said that it would cost the county $10 million to get the infrastructure going. And I just think it's important that we bring it out in public to let people know and to start thinking if we want to bring jobs to this county and not have everybody commute, that we need to take a serious look at the county investing. And I think Planning Commission might be a good spot to start the discussion before it would go to the Board of Supervisors, to give the public input and start learning about what needs to be done to accomplish the task.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So if the commission's interested, Mr. Chair, we'll work to set something up on one of the future upcoming meetings.
The individual did, through my county email, he did email me and said that he'd be interested.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll work with them directly, and we can keep you in the loop, Commissioner Gibson.
Thank you. And then item 3, there was the California Economic Summit at Fresno, and that was a 2-day event, but you could pick one day or both. And Friday interested me because it was more specific to the economy here locally, and that's why I brought that up to staff, that it would be something that's beneficial. It was $250 for the 1 day, plus the overnight, because it's a Thursday overnight for the seminar on Friday. And see if other commissioners are interested in going. That was November 8th.
Yes, 7th and 8th, Mr. Chair, staff did notice online that the online registrations was closed. There was a wait list that they established, but if commissioners are interested, we'll work with RMA administration and get names put on a wait list to see if there is availability.
Do we have that?
So I don't know. I'll give you you three the shot, since Valerie and I are going to these things more than anyone else. If any of you want to attend,
Yeah, I could potentially attend that Thursday, but not that Friday. So I could look at it and see what's available. You said you're interested more on the Friday.
yes.
So I'll take a look at what's on the docket for Thursday and see if that makes sense.
Okay.
Valerie?
And then I guess I have to be on a wait list anyways, right?
Yeah, Friday.
Yeah.
This is the 7th and 8th of November, right?
Right.
Correct.
So there's also an interest from Commissioner Egland and myself, so we'll have to see how things pan out, and we'll go from there.
Okay, yes, yeah. We'll take it back to Director Mavrogenis and have him see what he can find for funding available.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, one other thing I would just add, I guess, that we did include on the cover sheet is there were some good comments that we got from the RMA administrative staff, just in terms of going forward, if you all are interested in attending conferences and events and things like that, just some sort of ground rules that basically attendance at conferences needs to only be approved by the director. Unless it's for out-of-state travel, then it would need to go to the board, so that's good to know. And so again, we'd just encourage the commissioners to, if you come across events that seem, interesting or relevant or whatever, let staff know ASAP so that we can then see what we can do to get people signed up, find out about funding and so forth until such time as there's like a training budget or something established for the commissioners. But there's some other good helpful hints there in terms of, either getting reimbursed or working through staff to get registered for conferences and events.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Any more comment?
And then item number 4 was staff requested that Commissioner Egland and I give a more detailed presentation than we did the last meeting. We actually got back that night from Santa Barbara, so it was a long day. So I don't know if Commissioner Egland wants to go first or second with her remarks.
Yeah, I took notes, and I photographed a lot of the presentations. And for the most part, I think Robert Rivas has talked about the different bills that have been signed, or actually the bicycle one I don't think made it, SB 1. So most of the things that Rivas has been talking about were included in these different presentations. As a whole, looking at this on the outtake from the whole conference. Otherwise, it was a plethora of different discussions, and water quality and private wells was one. Something on mobile homes was very interesting, that the state over local jurisdiction, the density bonus with mobile homes, and the takings law, the League of Cities publication, designs for hazards, earthquake zones. Short-term rentals as being viewed very favorably by the Coastal Commission. Streamlining of multifamily approvals. Housing zones. The character of an area is not substantive was something interesting that I thought, as far as being able to curtail a permit. So, I don't know, I've got so many different things there. I would need to go through and itemize it, make a nice, because otherwise I'm just going to ramble all over the place, right? Robert may have a much more succinct delivery.
Okay. So there were some interesting discussions, and a lot of them had to deal with legislation that the governor has signed or vetoed. SB 330 was a big one, and I have yet to get a determination if it applies to our county due to the agricultural exemption. I'm waiting to hear back from County Council, the California HCD, and Assemblyman Rivas's office to get a determination. There was a AB 1763 granted additional density bonuses for affordable housing. AB 1485 streamlines multifamily housing. AB 1483 was for transparency, and it requires jurisdictions to develop a checklist to be provided to developers, and it has to be followed, and you can't add anything after the application has been submitted. It also requires that nexus studies, other fees, historical studies and fees be posted online. They really want the public to be able to see everything that the jurisdictions used. So it seems like we have a lot of work to do to comply with the state law there. The governor also signed a handful of bills regarding ADUs, and it basically streamlines it to a ministerial process, reduces timeframes to approve or disapprove to 60 days. If no action is taken, it's deemed approved by the state. It also reduces or eliminates water and sewer hookup charges and other impact fees.
That was on affordable housing,
ADUs.
ADUs.
Yeah.
That
So-
is fine.
And then in the other seminars, because that was just one, there were discussions about water supply should not dictate growth. Growth dictates, how we handle the water supply. So it shouldn't be used as a weapon against growth. General plan, there was a discussion of general plans and best practices by jurisdictions, and that if your zoning has not been changed to match your general plan within certain timeframes, you're behind the curve, and the state doesn't appreciate it, and we're right there, if not past, which I thought was interesting, which is why we need to invest in planning staff to get caught up soon, hopefully. Zoning, pretty much the discussion was that single-family zoning or single-family houses are the way of the past, and we need to catch up and change the hearts and minds of residents and developers to start building more multifamily housing. Interesting discussions on takings and exactions and how we have to be careful not to diminish people's property rights and values. And then there was a nice discussion on cannabis. In Santa Barbara, they allow outdoor grows, and the NIMBYs were using CEQA and then trying to pit other farmers against the cannabis growers to try to stop their applications, which we'll probably see coming up because we'll be reviewing our applications here shortly. And that was pretty much it for now.
There was one other thing I would mention is that Caltrans did a nice presentation of safe routes to schools and active transportation accommodation, complete streets, and their slogan was first and last mile within transit zones, so that within a mile from a transit accommodation, that you can bicycle easily there, store your bicycle, and bike home. So that's the first and last mile concept, and so I thought that was pretty nice. Good job, Robert.
And I will state that we did, for the most part, go to different seminars so that we could capture more knowledge between the two of us.
Very good.
Great.
That was good information.
Helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
And to follow up on a discussion I had with Mr. Boyd earlier, that the commission and each commissioner is a member of the California APA, and soon we should be getting logins. And with those logins, you can actually go through and look at the presentations that we received at Santa Barbara. So there's a lot of information that would be helpful to everybody on the commission.
And that website is, oh God, it's long. apacalifornia.org/events/conference-session. We should just send this around to
Yeah.
everybody as a link.
Send the link.
Or apacalifornia.org and then
Yeah, I
navigate
can
from
give it
there.
to you. Yeah. And that's what a question I had for this evening. Are we members? Because you have to be a member to get more than just a few sessions.
I think so, Mr. Chair. That's what I was telling Commissioner Gibson. I thought I saw an email fly by that was saying that you all were members, but we'll confirm that and let you know for sure.
Okay, good. That's the same with the Business Council also. And that's why anybody wanting to go to the Business Council, as commissioners, we have carte blanche. We're included.
Okay.
Okay. That's it? Any more questions? So, we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.